Welcome to the Pretty Intense podcast, and it's pretty intense today with the brilliant Professor Brian Greene. He is a theoretical physicist. He is also the director of Columbia University's Center for Theoretical Physics. He has gone very deep into string theory and mirror symmetry and so many things that I don't really understand extremely well, but I'm super fascinated with. I've always been interested in the universe and our reality and how everything works. So we talked about time, we talked about entropy, we talked about dimensions, we talked about matter and what we're made of. And we really just kind of drilled down on some of the fundamentals that we experience in life. We talked about the Hadron Collider in Switzerland, in CERN, and what the role of that is and what they've learned from it and what they're trying to learn. Brian is a professor, and so he has an incredible ability to be able to communicate in a comprehensive way. For me, I love to learn a little past my limit because that's the only way you do learn. You get those words planted inside of you and then they kind of are seeds and they grow. So I understood a lot, but there's some stuff I didn't understand. I'm grateful for that because that just means that I will expand just like the universe. Enjoy. Please hit subscribe button and the bell for notifications. I'd love to hear the things that resonate with you in this interview in the comments and just some of your thoughts on it. We all play a part in this sort of zeitgeist of information. So put your thoughts down. Yeah, I am super, super excited about this. Jen said before we started, she goes, "Are you ready?" And I was like, I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be for a theoretical physicist.
Yeah, it doesn't take as much preparation as you think. We're a silly bunch.
But it's like an incredible amount of math, right?
There is, if you're into the pushing the boundaries of understanding side of it, which is, of course, the exciting thing for a researcher to do. But for the general person who just wants the ideas, not interested in trying to make the next breakthrough, you don't really need the math at all, because all of this is just a tool to understand things. And ultimately, understanding can be communicated in more ordinary, familiar language.
So just through lecturing and reading and watching things, you're saying?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know a gazillion people who have a deep, deep passion for understanding everything from the beginning of the universe to how stars work, how black holes form, what the fundamental ingredients of matter are. And they don't have any math training, which means they can't get into the details of how we figure things out. But sure, I think anybody can grasp the idea that the universe is made of stuff, and we've tried to identify what that stuff is. And that stuff, those particles, they are governed by certain laws. We frame the laws mathematically, but in the end, they're just rules of engagement, rules of the road that the particles have to abide by. And from that, we can build up structures, stars, planets, people, and we're off and running. So yeah, you don't need the math. You can get it through books and lectures and well done programs, discussions, debates, television. Okay.
Sure. So you need the math to prove it so that you can teach it, right? Like the math is necessary. Otherwise there wouldn't be the lessons because there wouldn't be the proof. And then you'd just be making it up.
That's a pretty important point because some of the ideas of physics are so out there, unfamiliar, that you might think it's just sort of the ravings of a bunch of idle minds, to say it politely, or maybe lunatics who are off, the deep end, just intuiting and positing and making stuff up. And that's not at all what it's about. We have a rigorous set of procedures that are couched in the language of mathematics, exactly as you say. Mm-hmm. And we follow those mathematical procedures and we allow them to take us to new ideas about the world. And then we go out and we test those ideas, right? I mean, Isaac Newton wrote down some math that governs how bodies move. And then people went out and tested the math and saw, do the bodies move along the trajectories that the mathematics predicts? And they did. And that allowed us to go the next step and the next step forward.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But how valuable are the crazy ideas? Because at any point in time, a lot of the most brilliant people were looked at as being crazy. Like they had crazy ideas and Some of them were even, I think about someone like a Nikola Tesla that, just seems like they were almost ostracized, or they were so unique in their thinking that they were all alone on an island. So does it take the crazy thoughts, though, to back into math to really go to the next level? And also, where do those crazy thoughts even come from?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, in rough language, there are crazy thoughts, and then there are crazy thoughts. And knowing the difference between them is very difficult. I mean, there are some crazy thoughts which, as you say, have pushed our understanding forward. Tesla had crazy thoughts that ultimately proved deeply insightful. Albert Einstein had a handful of crazy thoughts that were deeply insightful, ultimately pushes forward. But when you analyze their crazy thoughts, you realize that they emerged from deep and systematic and creative thinking about some very specific problems that they understood really well, because they'd already gone through the corpus of understanding that had led up to their moment in history. There are other crazy thoughts that I get all the time in emails, in letters, sometimes in phone calls, which is the most disturbing of all.
Wow.
And these are from people who I hold no ill will toward. I really mean that. But I get, manuscripts from people who say, I've been in my basement for 20 years and I finally figured it all out. And you get this thick manuscript of all these ideas and diagrams and equations. And after sort of 30 seconds or a minute of looking at it, you realize there's nothing here but the ravings of a kind of unhinged mind, maybe just unhinged in physics. Maybe they're perfectly hinged in everyday life. I don't know, but they've gone off the deep end. And I always feel deeply sad for some of these individuals, because they did what you did in a sense. They said, look at what Tesla did. Crazy thoughts that changed the world. Look what Einstein did. Crazy thoughts that changed the world. I'm going to be the next one. I'm going to come up with some crazy thoughts, and they're going to change the world too. And maybe that will happen one day. But the challenge is the other individuals that we're making reference to, and it's not just Tesla and Einstein. It's Faraday, and it's Maxwell, and it's Bohr, and it's Heisenberg, and it's Schrödinger. Right? So many of them, they all deeply studied everything that was known to that point, and they put in the hard work, the labor to learn the mathematics, to learn the ideas that took us to the frontier of understanding. And with that corpus of knowledge, they then went and allowed their creative minds to go wild. You can't just let your creative mind go wild when you don't have that kind of rigorous training, because it's not going to lead anywhere for the most part.
So there's a base. You're saying that the useful crazy ideas, the fringe crazy ideas that can actually turn into something that we use and we understand and can be cutting edge, usually starts with a base of knowledge. It comes with there has to be some information. So then where is it? I'm very fascinated with like where this information comes in, and it feels like a lot of really brilliant people have an epiphany or a thought or an idea, a concept, something that they really are curious about and they believe in very much, and spend a lot of their life backing into how that can actually be put into a mathematical equation. So I'm curious if you believe that's true on some level, and where does that come in? Where do those concepts come in? And what I'm kind of leading into is consciousness, quantum entanglement, and the field around us.
Yeah. So the short answer to that important question is I don't know, and nobody on planet Earth does. So it's a great question, but nobody really knows. And obviously, as we head into the arena of artificial intelligence, that question becomes ever more pointed and can be explored in very specific ways. I mean, I think, I've certainly played with some of the new AI systems and have been, in some cases, pretty impressed with what seems like creative ideas emerging from a system that I do not believe is conscious.
Oh, wow. That's
So
scary.
that's a curious, combination right there. But going back to just the human side of it, I think what the brain does is obviously it's a survival gadget, right? Our brain evolved because our ancestors in the African savanna and elsewhere on planet Earth, they were under pressure to find the next meal, to get lodging that would protect them from the harsh environment. And you look at us, we're not the strongest out there in the world. We're not the fastest, right? But what do we have? We have cognitive abilities that are among the most sophisticated on planet Earth. I'm not going to say, I don't like, this kind of human singularism, human exceptionalism per se. There are other intelligent creatures on the planet, but we're in the upper echelon, let's say.
We lack sonar and a few things. So
that's right. Exactly. And so what we did is, in order to survive, we gained an ever more refined capacity through evolution by natural selection to find creative solutions to the challenges that we faced. Rather than, being able to jump over that fast moving stream, we found a way of navigating through that fast moving stream that most other life forms wouldn't have found. And so we then passed on this creative ability to abstract and come up with creative solutions. We pass it on to the next generation, and they refined it, and on it went across the generations. And then when it comes to science, basically, what is science? Science is taking that capacity and pushing it well beyond the needs of survival, right? We don't need to understand electrons, right? We don't need to understand electrons or quantum physics or black holes to get the next meal or to have, shelter. But what our brains do is they overshoot. We go beyond the needs of mere survival. And so that creative instinct that served us well in the ancestral world now gives us the capacity to understand esoteric qualities of the world, like quantum physics and entanglement and black holes and general relativity and so forth. So somewhere in that evolutionary mix is the answer to your question. But if you ask me, when I look at some of the deep insights of physics, and look, one of my specializations is in relativity. So Einstein, of course, is the grand hero. So I'll just use him as an example, but there are many. When I look at some of the ideas that Einstein introduced into physics, like curved space-time, I've tried to follow his reasoning because I wanted to answer your question. Where did this idea come from? So I trace it back. And you can post facto make an explanation. Aha, he was thinking about this, then this, then this. But I think we're just making up a story. I think at some level, the human brain rearranges ingredients. It finds new patterns. It finds new combinations. And Einstein had the ability to find a radically new combination that nobody had thought about before that ultimately led to his greatest contribution, the general theory of relativity. So somewhere in that mix of a brain that can creatively find solutions and just the wonderful architecture of the mind that allows it to rearrange pieces, new ideas emerge.
There's a thought that there's no unique ideas, no new ideas. Do you believe that to be true?
Well, it depends, of course, how you define the word new. I think the vast majority of ideas are rearrangements of existing pieces. Finding new patterns within stuff that's already out there. And to my mind, if that teaches you something, if it gives you insight, if it allows you to leverage it to build something that you couldn't have done before, then I'm happy to call it a new idea. So I guess I'm maybe a little less strict with my definition of new. But from that perspective, I'd say the ingredients are there, but it's all about how you arrange them and the patterns that you find.
Then what are we? If we're pattern-making machines, if we're meaning-making machines, right? What exactly are we?
I have a couple of answers to that, and they all interleave at some level. And I think in addressing an important question like that, you have to choose the level of analysis that you're asking the question. So if you ask me, what are we at the fundamental physical level, I'd say we are nothing but large collections of particles, atoms, electrons, protons, neutrons that have configured themselves into a very specific coherent pattern that allows us to navigate the world in the manner that we do. So answer number one, we're bags of particles governed by physical law.
That's mostly energy, right? So empty space too.
It's mostly empty space, and the particles carry energy. And there certainly is energy in the form of radiation that we are immersed within. So yes, there's a wonderful interplay between the stuff that we're made of and the ambient environment. Okay. I wouldn't want to stop my explanation of who we are there because it's very mechanistic. And so I would start to build up. And if we had enough time, I'd go through a bit of chemistry, a bit of biology, but let me go right to the level of human mind, because that's really, I think, where we feel who we are. And at that level, the language that you used, I would concur with. We are meaning-making machines. We are pattern recognition devices. We find it very useful to look out into the world and organize things, as that helps us to survive and to gain greater insight into the kinds of behaviors that will be beneficial to us. And so we are bags of particles that have the special ability to find patterns, to invent meaning, and in that way to experience the world at the level that you and I are right now, at the conscious level. That to me is still a deep mystery. Where does consciousness come from? But I would say in between these two scales, bags of particles and meaning-making pattern recognition machines, that sort of spans the gamut of what we mean by a human being.
Do you agree with Elon Musk that there's a very high probability that we are a simulation? It seems like as pattern recognizers, and then we make these patterns essentially in our world, that we're a pattern making a pattern. Wouldn't a pattern make a pattern?
Yes. And there are many self-referential versions of that statement. You know, we are collections of atoms that can contemplate atoms. We are massive amounts of molecules that can make meaning, right? I mean, so there is this wonderful juxtaposition between our physical makeup, the fact that everything else in the world has its physical makeup, and we recognize that because we are patterns of particles with the capacity to find patterns in other particles. So I think it's a beautiful story about how there's an objective world out there, and we can build a model of that objective world in our subjective minds, and that allows us to navigate and survive in a way that would be difficult otherwise. As to the question, though, that you started with are we in a simulation? I would have to say, from a gut feeling, I think I would, like most people, recoil at that idea, say the answer manifestly is not true. There are powerful arguments, and I don't know the one that Elon Musk perhaps is making reference to, but certainly you can imagine that if in the future, I don't believe that we have this capacity, at least here at the moment, but if we are able to build artificial systems, computers, say, that do have sentience, that do have an inner world of conscious experience, then yes, I think in the future it may be possible to simulate worlds in which there are beings inside the simulation that feel things.
Right.
I don't see an obstacle to that in any fundamental way. I don't think that this gloppy gray biological thing inside of our heads is essential to have the kinds of experiences that we do. I think if there's a computational version of this that does it correctly, and that's a big question, how would you do that? I don't see any obstacle for there to be a feeling, sensing being inside of a computer. I don't see a fundamental obstacle. If that's the case, you do run into an interesting idea, which is in the very far future, whatever that means, it may be very easy to sit down in the evening, flip on a few switches, push a few buttons, and create a whole universe inside of a computer. And if everybody is doing this, it's the new fad. You can imagine that there are a gazillion of these simulated worlds running in parallel on all these powerful computers. And then you'd say, well, what's the likelihood that this universe is not one of those, that this one is somehow special? It's a real universe. Well, I think there's only one real universe. If there are a gazillion simulated ones, the odds are we're in a simulation. And that's sort of the way that reasoning goes. The big if, can you create consciousness in a computer? Nobody really knows the answer to that. And the other big if, and this is emphasized by a philosopher named Nick Bostrom at Oxford, just to give credit where credit is due, he said, look, maybe it's the case that any sufficiently advanced civilization that gains the capacity to understand things well enough to make sentience inside of a computer, at the same time, they're also building sophisticated weapons, because apparently that's what smart beings do, at least from this one piece of data. And they blow themselves up before they get to the point of creating these simulated worlds. Maybe nobody survives long enough because we're such an aggressive life form. So that's the other way that you can obviate this conclusion that we're in a simulation. Or you can simply say, hey, I don't believe that you'll ever have consciousness in a computer. Done. End of story.
I can see the pathway. I mean, if there was something, if consciousness, if I was using a controller and playing a video game, then the consciousness is still making that play or do something.
It is, but it's still channeled through you. You know, what we think is a flesh and blood. Look, we've never met, and right now you're just a bunch of pixels on my screen. But I'm assuming that you're not some sort of fancy video chat bot, that there's a real human being there. And given that, you are still the initiator and the origin of the consciousness that's driving your avatar in that video game. Imagine, though, you don't need that the avatar in the video game is so sophisticated that it creates its own consciousness, and maybe it can even replicate within that world and have children that are conscious.
Sure, but doesn't it start? It has to start. I mean, that's where Google and all these programs are collecting data and creating AI with it, is that it does start with us, though.
So far, I agree that in the examples that we're playing with now, which are, you know, from 10 years to 100 years to 1,000 years, are going to look so incredibly archaic and rudimentary.
Sure.
So let's get out there. But yes, so right now we're having these systems that are training on the corpus of text on the internet and books that we human beings have created. So in a sense, we are giving birth to these systems. Their intelligence is emerging from our intelligence. But that is just the beginning. I think you've probably seen these wonderful examples where chess programs have been written, or for the game Go have been written. And how do those chess programs become expert? Well, in the old days, you had a really smart person who understood chess who would program them how to play. But now these chess programs, they battle against each other. And through winning and losing, they refine their own playing capacity. There isn't a human being that's saying, hey, you know, rook to pawn 7 or whatever. I mean, I don't even know what that means, right? I don't play chess. The system is learning from experience, and that's not human intervention. Humans set it up, but then we can sit back and let the system, and that's what's exciting and terrifying at the same time.
So what defines sentient then?
Tough question. I think it's the kind of thing we know when we see it, or more precisely, we know it when we feel it.
Feel it, yeah.
I mean, inside my brain, I have one example of sentience. It's my own. And I can try to describe it. Obviously, everything I say will be very familiar to anybody else who has sentience. You know, I can feel things. I can imagine things. I can think about things in the past. I can conjure imagery in my mind. I can feel sad. I can feel happy. I can feel elated. So all those things that we call the qualities of a conscious being is what we mean by sentience. But the paradox, or the challenge, perhaps is a better word, I have no knowledge that any other being is sentient, and no other being has any knowledge that I'm truly sentient. I could just be a really sophisticated program, and there's really no way for you to know. And so I'm assuming that my kind of experience of sentience resonates with yours, but you may not even have any sentience. You may just be a shell of a person nodding there. I don't think you are, so don't take this personally.
I don't have a lot of feelings, but I have some.
But you know, it's just, you can't get inside somebody else's head. And
So it
since you
almost
can't get in
feels
their
like
head, how can you know?
yeah, it's almost like one of my favorite movies when I was a kid growing up, and it's no wonder that I'm interested in this stuff, was Contact. And
Yeah.
hearing the, science versus spirituality, and Jodie Foster being asked if she can prove that she loved her dad, and
Yeah.
you can't. So it's almost like maybe sentience is the ability to feel.
Yeah, it's certainly part of it. And you bring up that movie, and one of my favorite lines of that film was, I'll probably get it wrong, but when Jodie Foster goes through the wormhole and she's looking at this beautiful extraterrestrial world out there, and she says, they should have sent a poet. Because that's the only person who could really capture in human language the splendor, the grandeur, the wonder of it all. So yes,
And
I
turn it
would
into a
say,
feeling.
yeah, the capacity to be able to feel, but it's also a little bit further because, if you have, I'm not saying that a fly isn't conscious. There's some level of consciousness, but there's a difference, I think, between the level of consciousness of a fly or an ant and what we feel. But clearly, if you nudge an ant, it moves in a different direction. It felt something.
Right.
Maybe it has some instinctual repulsion against danger that has been instilled in it through evolution by natural selection. What we can do is not only feel, but we can feel that we feel. We can recognize that we can feel. And it's that self-referential capacity that I think lifts us up and allows us to not only examine the external world, but to look back on ourselves and recognize that we are examining the external world. And somewhere in that self-referential capacity is the distinguishing characteristic that makes us us.
Yeah, I totally agree. I am often thinking about the fact that what makes us, what is real, and what is a human, and the fact that we're able to, and what is consciousness, and the fact that we're able to be aware that we're awareness of thoughts. Then we're not the ocean, then, in a way, right? We're not the ocean not knowing it's the ocean. We are aware we're the ocean.
Right. No, that's the key thing. It's a key thing because you can imagine a lot of systems that respond to stimuli in the environment and in some sense are feeling the environment. We obviously can do that, but we can look back on ourselves and recognize that that's what we are doing. And it's that feeling that we are feeling that allows us to have a very different perspective on the world, one that allows us to distinguish ourselves in a very clear sense from the external environment.
So it makes me think a little bit about time, a little bit about time travel, and I'm fascinated by it. And some of the things as of late that I've done, and I describe them as time travel, is like EMDR. Some therapists use their hand, but it's a rapid eye movement. You go left, right, either with a hand, or for me, my therapist uses a buzzer. So there's a buzzer in each hand and it goes back and forth. And you go into a memory. And then from that memory, you just let your mind essentially go blank as best as you can. It's like meditation. It's super hard, but that's what you need to do. And then you're able to revisit the experience from your maturity level, your experience level, seeing it from a observer standpoint, seeing it from their standpoint or someone else's standpoint that was a part of this memory. And I get very curious as to whether or not we're actually time traveling, because that's the way I would describe it. And so I wonder, like, what is time? And then are we actually able to time travel? I also think about sleep. I think about psychedelic experiences. And in these spaces, you have these visceral, real experiences. Yeah. And now, for sure, at least with EMDR, my memory is completely reprogrammed from every event that I went into.
Yeah. So the language can be suggestive, but also potentially dangerous. So I like to be slightly precise in the words that I use here. Oftentimes, when people talk about time travel, they mean it in a more literal sense. That you will leave wherever we are today. I don't even know what the date is, but call it June 6th or something, 2023 or something like that, whatever. That we leave this date and we may only age, 5 minutes, but we go to June 6, 2090, or June 6, 3497. We actually go to a different date, or we go to a different date in the past. And there are aspects of that we understand from the point of view of physics, and there are aspects that we don't. Briefly put, Albert Einstein did lay down a blueprint for, in principle, underscore in principle, how to go arbitrarily far into the future in this flat-footed, most literal sense. You go near the speed of light, your clock ticks off time at a different rate. That allows you to go into the future. Or you hang out near the edge of a black hole, your clock ticks at a different rate. That allows you to go into the future. We haven't done this. We don't know how to travel near the speed of light. We've never gone near a black hole. Those are details. From the point of view of fundamental physics, traveling to the future, we understand well. To the past is another story that we could describe. Most of us don't think it's possible. The time travel that you're talking about is a version of time travel, but very different from the literal one that I'm referring to here. And in many ways, it's richer, because what you're referring to is the capacity of our brains to revisit moments in the past, or to imagine moments in the future, and to engage with those periods in time as if they were real. As if is important here. You're not truly going to that past moment. You're not truly going to that future moment, but you nevertheless are engaging with it in a meaningful and maybe helpful, maybe therapeutic way. And that again shows how powerful the human mind is. I don't think that the mind of an ant is really going and imagining, oh, I remember 2 years ago when Mama Ant, took me to the fair. I don't think the ants are doing that, right? And we have the ability to do that. And as you're saying, there are therapeutic methodologies whereby we can even modify our engagement with that past event. And people, of course, have used these techniques for, PTSD, to alleviate the symptoms. And so this is all really powerful and potent stuff, but it is different from the literal version of time travel that we have a pretty good handle on from the standpoint of physics. That doesn't mean that it's less important. In many ways, it's more important, but it's good to keep them separate.
Yes, totally accurate, fair, understand, but it almost plays into like the two examples of what are we?
Yes.
There's the physical, and then there's the mental.
Totally.
So we haven't figured out how to physically time travel, but it feels like we've figured out how to mentally time travel.
100%. And I think that again just emphasizes the wonder of consciousness. The wonder of consciousness is, yes, even if our physical form is tethered to the moment, we're not going to travel near the speed of light tomorrow. We're not going to go near a black hole tomorrow. So for the practical purposes, we are tethered to the moment, but our minds are untethered from the moment in a very powerful way. Our minds are free to roam the timeline.
Yeah.
And that's wonderful and amazing. And just as a richness to our inner world, our inner experience, our conscious experience that our physical form is unable to keep up with. But that's the power and beauty of the mind.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's where AI comes in.
Well, I don't know. I
Body can't keep up.
Yeah, the AI is a very potent, powerful, and frightening and exciting realm that we're now clearly about to enter into, and who knows where it will lead. And again, the part of it that people never fully grasp, it's really hard to get it across. And I sort of had hoped that the pandemic would do this, but it seems to not. I mean, what happened in the pandemic was we saw exponential growth, which means only 3 people are sick on Tuesday, and then 500,000 are sick, the following week. And what exponential growth is, it's a process whereby when you notice it, it's too late to do much about it because it's taken off. You need to anticipate it. And so like when the pandemic was just starting to bubble up, I was like, okay, I saw what was happening. And at least from the standpoint of my family, I did all I could to prepare well before anybody was worried about anything happening. Similarly with AI, it's going to explode and is exploding at an exponential rate. And you need to deal with it now before there are big problems that are staring you in the face or beating you down or defeating you. And
Right.
I'm glad to see that people are recognizing this at an early stage, because once AI begins to reinvent itself, because that's the power of this approach, like with the chess program that we mentioned before, AI can self-improve. Doesn't need us if it's set up in the right way.
Yeah.
And it's in essence doing evolution by natural selection, but not on the timescales that physical systems need, which is millions and billions of years in order to evolve, because it's generation by generation, mutation by mutation. AI, it can mutate in a nanosecond and a nanosecond again. And so it's really important that we face these issues, these important issues now.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's somewhat been my experience through psychedelics too, is that there's so much information in that field that it's no wonder why we have to evolve slowly, is because it's too much data. Like, it's overwhelming how much information is in that space.
So what have you done in psychedelics, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, most things. Ayahuasca.
How was that?
Ayahuasca. It's a more aggressive,
Yeah.
more aggressive one.
Did you get sick? Did you get very sick? Yep.
Yep. One night got sick, one night didn't. But it was, I mean, it gave me a very fundamental lesson in my life that I needed to know.
Yeah.
And that took and has been integrating for years and figuring it out. It feels like a bigger lesson in your life, like about yourself. Psilocybin is far more, I've done therapeutically as well as more recreationally.
Yeah.
That to me is understanding the universe. To me, that's where you get a lot more information about the field, about how things work. That feels very like planet oriented or universe oriented. Maybe you should try that one.
Well, I had one slightly rough experience that has made me gun shy about anything, but people who I've spoken to, and I'm sure you would confirm it, that setting, being with the right people, being with the right guide can really make all the difference in the world. So at some point I may try again, because obviously, when I hear you and I hear others describe being in the world in a different way under the influence of, a certain chemical, that to me is really exciting, because consciousness is all we ever experience. And if you can modify that experience in an interesting and productive and mind altering way, that seems important and deeply compelling to me. The little experience I had, though, was so terrifying that it was the kind of thing that was like,
What happened?
don't want to ever go back there again.
What happened?
Well, it was, I don't want to go into any great detail, sort of spoken about it elsewhere, but I think largely, if I was going to say it in one sentence, I could not let go. And if you can't let go, or at least you fight to not let go, you're in a real rough situation, because your mind wants to go far and explore. And if you're desperately hanging on every moment for dear life, it can be real deep tension between
100%.
those two. And that's pretty much what I experienced.
100%. The experience isn't nearly as deep or as interesting too, because the mind can totally hold you back from going there, and it can be scary and it can be uncomfortable. Yeah, that's fair. I never tell people you have to do this. I would only tell my experience. And I hope any good steward of that, of psychedelics would say that it has to call you. It has to be something.
And do you do this on a regular basis kind of thing, or is it just as
needed? It's as it calls, Ayahuasca was 3 years ago. My psilocybin journey that I did was like 6 months ago. So, but those have been the most significant things, other than a little bit of.
And where did you do ayahuasca? Out of the country?
Yeah, Peru.
Yeah, Peru.
Yeah. That kind of leads me into thinking about dimensions. Actually, one thing I forgot, you were talking about everything accelerating, and there's a theory within at least the spiritual community, or like spiritual thoughts, that time is speeding up. Is there any way that's possible?
Well, I can talk directly from the physics of the
Yeah.
situation. And I would say there is resonance in that time is much more fluid than we would think based on everyday experience, right? Everyday experience seems to suggest that your watch and my watch and everybody's watch, if it's a properly functioning watch, they're all ticking off time at the same rate. That's sort of all there is to it. And from a practical standpoint, that's pretty much true, which is why it's what we experience. But from a physics standpoint, it's absolutely not true. Because as I made reference to before, if you and I are moving relative to each other, our watches are not ticking off time at the same rate. If I go to the top of a tall building, even on planet Earth, my watch will be ticking off time a little bit more quickly than clocks that are down on the surface, because I'm experiencing less gravity. And the less gravity you experience, the more quickly your clock will tick compared to a clock that's experiencing more gravity. So in that sense, time speeds up, it slows down depending upon the gravity you experience and the speed with which you are moving. But on planet Earth, most of us are pretty much moving at the same speed.
Yeah.
The only speed that matters in this context is the speed of light. Light travels so quickly that it's well beyond any experience. It goes 300 million meters per second. It can go around the entire Earth more than 7 times in 1 second. 7 times around the Earth in 1 second. Now, if you can achieve those speeds, then the difference in your watch and my watch would become manifest. We would measure the difference between those.
Yeah.
But on planet Earth, how fast do you go? 100 miles an hour?
240 miles an hour. Like, did I age more or less going 240 miles an hour?
That's right. It's so tiny. We're talking in the billionths and the trillionths of a second difference, that it's irrelevant from a practical standpoint. So from a practical perspective, no, time is not speeding up. It's not slowing down. It is the same for all of us on planet Earth. From a cosmic, and I don't mean like new agey cosmic, I mean from the cosmic perspective of how time behaves in the universe, there is no universal clock. There is no one time that we are all tethered to. Clocks tick off time depending on how they move and the gravity they experience. Do you remember an Interstellar?
Yeah, I do. I love this. My favorite movie.
Oh, good. So do you remember when the Matthew McConaughey and the other actor, I can't remember her name. Sorry, apologies.
Anne Hathaway.
Yeah, Anne Hathaway, exactly. So
they went down to that planet.
They go down that planet, right? And their other companion back on the ship, I forget his name. Yep. When they return, they were down there for like 4 hours, and he's aged 23 years.
Yes.
Okay. This is how science actually works. That was not Hollywood nonsense. If you go near a black hole, the gravity is powerful. That slows the ticking of time on your watch compared to the watch that's on the ship far away from the black hole. And so a few hours for you on that planet near the black hole would be something like 23 years for someone back on the ship. There you have time speeding up, slowing down right there. And that's accurate.
Yeah. So that is, it's real. It's just so minuscule here, but it's real. It's just, and this is how scientists and physicists are able to make calculations, is that you look at the small to get the big, right?
Exactly. That was the power of Einstein. You put your finger right on it. He would see a little crack in the mathematics that wouldn't be relevant for experience here on planet Earth, but he would push the mathematics forward and reveal what that crack in our understanding would mean for the entirety of the cosmos. And indeed, he was the one that found that time ticks off at different rates depending on the gravitational field.
So is time dimension that exists in the entire universe?
I think so. I think that's a reasonable way of putting it. It perhaps is less mysterious than it might sound. I mean, when we talk about dimension, it's usually the data necessary to specify where or when something takes place. So, for us to have our conversation, I got a little email saying, it's going to be whatever, 11 o'clock on whatever is today, Tuesday or something. Is it, 11 o'clock on Tuesday, and I needed to be, at my desk to do that, right? So what are the data? You need to give me some spatial data, right? I needed to be, here. we also needed to give a temporal piece of data, and that was the time. And so 3 pieces of data delineate where you are in space. 1 piece of data tells you where you are in time. So that's why we say 4 dimensions, not anything sort of more mysterious than that. And that's relevant for events that are taking place throughout the entirety of the universe. If you want to specify them, you have to say where they take place, like an X, Y, and Z coordinate, a street, an avenue, and a floor number. And then you also have to say when they take place. There's your temporal dimension, 4 pieces of data to specify events.
Mm. So what are the dimensions beyond that? And how many dimensions how many dimensions can we prove?
I don't know. So there may not be any beyond that. That's the most flat-footed, straightforward interpretation of the data. But if you ask somebody like me, who spent decades investigating the extra dimensional possibility, there is interesting reasons from the math for taking the idea of other dimensions at least seriously. We have not seen any evidence. I just need to be straight out about that for these extra dimensions. But, for the past 35 years, I've been investigating theories that suggest that there are more dimensions of space than the 3 that we know about. And why? Where does this come from? Well, we've been trying to push forward to realize a dream articulated initially by Einstein of having what's called the unified theory. One mathematical theory that would describe the big things in the universe, the small things, and everything in between. And that's quite a challenge. Einstein himself never found this unified theory. But in the last few decades, we think we might, and again, I need to underscore, there is uncertainty here. We think we might have that theory. And within that theory, when we study the math, it says that the 3 dimensions of space that we know about are not the only ones. It says that there are at least 6, probably 7, depending on how you formulate it, extra dimensions of space that we've never seen. But
6 or 7 beyond the 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. A grand total of 11, if you want to frame it in that way. And we have ideas regarding why we've not seen these extra dimensions. One possibility is they're not big like the dimensions that we see around us. They may be tightly curled up into a very small shape, and they would be all around us, but just too tiny for us to easily see. I can give you I don't know if I can see. Look at this. So look at this little wire, right?
Yeah.
Now from far away, you wouldn't be easy to see the thickness. You'd only see the length of the wire.
Sure.
But now, as I get closer and closer, it becomes easier and easier for you to see that there's an extra dimension, a curled up circular dimension that goes around the wire. It doesn't just have length. It also has this circular part, a curled up dimension. Imagine that circular part was incredibly tiny, atomic scale. Then you wouldn't be able to see it with the naked eye at all. And all it would look like is one line from my left hand to my right hand. But if you zoom in, then the circular dimension becomes more apparent. We think that might be true of the universe. This obvious dimension would be like left, right, back, forth, up, down. 3 dimensions, easy to see. The curled up part might be like those other 7 dimensions that are harder to see. They're all around us, but so tiny that the naked eye or even powerful equipment that we currently have can't access them.
What are we thinking, or what are you guys thinking is in the dimensions?
Well, everything that you know about, in a sense, would be there, because everything fundamentally we learn from quantum physics is vibrating fields of energy. The electron field, the quark fields, gravitation is described by a field. And these fields can penetrate these extra dimensions if they have adequate energy, if they're strong enough, the fields are strong enough. So in principle, anything can probe into those extra dimensions. It's just a question of the amount of energy that the probe has.
So there's a thought that, like, as we grow and evolve, our frequency goes up, and then maybe we could get into these other dimensions, or maybe this is just access through.
That language worries me a lot.
Yeah, it's because it's mine. It's not a physicist language.
Yeah, but let me just say why. Because I mentioned earlier how often I get these letters from people who are investigating stuff, and a frequent quality of those letters are things that seem to resonate with what you're saying. They say to me, Professor Greene, you wrote about extra dimensions of space. I need to tell you, I had an experience of those extra dimensions. I did this and I penetrated, I walked around, and I read them like, oh my God, please, you're talking nonsense. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just feel bad when people go down directions that lead them into places that we never meant these ideas to go. So we human beings were big on the scale of these extra dimensions. We big, clunky objects really don't have any means of penetrating into these extra dimensions. We don't have adequate energy that is directed at a sufficiently small size to do that. So for all intents and purposes, our brains, our minds, our bodies do not penetrate into these extra dimensions if they are there. The only way that we as human beings would be able to access these dimensions is, let's say, with the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva, Switzerland, slamming protons against protons at high energy. And if we do that the right way, there's a chance we might be able to probe the extra dimensions if the scales and the energies are correct. But it's never going to be that like the human brain wafted into the extra dimensions, or that our energy field wafted. That kind of idea is not part of reality as we understand it.
What about the hydrogen? I was actually going to ask you about that. What have we actually learned from it?
Enormous amount. I mean, the first big discovery was now a while ago. I remember I spoke about it in July 4th of 2012. It was Independence Day. I was in Aspen, Colorado at a big conference when the Higgs boson was finally confirmed. This hypothetical, this is actually resonating with what we were talking about before. The math told a guy named Peter Higgs, as well as a number of others who should get and do get credit, but let me just focus on him because his name is the name on the particle. The math showed Peter Higgs that there should be a particle of matter that we'd never seen. Not an electron, not a quark, not a neutrino, but this spinless boson, as it's called the Higgs boson. Details don't matter, but the math predicted it. And then that was like in the 60s. 2012, finally, the Large Hadron Collider slams protons together and produces this little particle for the first time. It's spectacular, right? It's beautiful. So that was then, and since then, the collider has allowed us to refine our understanding of particle physics enormously, but it's not yielded any revolutionary surprises yet. And you can read that two ways. You can say, well, wow, so our theories are so good that this machine is just confirming them over and over again. We should, slap ourselves on the back.
And it's an expensive theoretical physicist, that is.
Yeah, that's right. So the other view is we need something new in order to tell us what next direction to go. And so that may require the next machine, a bigger machine, more powerful machine. They are being designed and developed. We hope that they will be built. And those other machines, when they slam things together with even greater force, might probe the extra dimensions directly, or produce a particle that is completely unexpected, or reveal a force of nature that we had never even imagined. So that's the excitement, but also sometimes the downfall of our insight is that the theories are pretty good, and it takes a lot, therefore, to surprise us.
Yeah, that is kind of an amazing thought.
Yeah.
Are there any, given the fact that you're looking at hard numbers and you're looking at the physics of how everything works, is there some kind of ripple effect of the amount of energy that the collider is producing that ripples out into the universe, or even the planet or the city that it's in? Is there any, is that quantifiable? It
is, but it's trivially small on the scales that we're talking about. Yeah, because when we talk about this being a powerful collider, what you have to really think about is we're taking energy and we're able to pinpoint it, direct it into a really small space. That's what these collisions are. But just to give you a sense of the energy scale in that collider, if you translated it into how much mass, are we talking about? Energy and mass are the same thing, Einstein taught us. And I think it's easier for us to think about mass. So how much
That's
mass?
not matter, though. Energy and mass is not matter, though.
Well, matter is one version of energy. It's not the only version. There's also radiation, which is another version of energy. And we understand well the interplay between them. But in some sense, energy is sort of the uber currency that can then manifest, in dollars or euros, in matter or radiation, sort of the sort of way of thinking about it. But the matter, if you will, that we're able to muster in these collisions is a tiny fraction of a gram, like 10 to the minus, 10 grams or 10 to the minus 15 grams. It's minuscule on everyday scales. It's huge on the scales of being able to direct it into such a small space. But in terms of the ripple effect, it's just too modest to really affect anything at all.
Why is it so big?
Well, the energy that you create in a collider is in some sense proportional to the size of the collider, because you have to rev up these tiny particles that weigh nearly nothing, protons. Right. You have to rev them up to get them so close to the speed of light. So you need a big racetrack to be able to do that. You rev them up and then you slam them together. And the bigger the racetrack, the easier it is to get them to the high speed, the high energy. But again, because it's a proton, the impact on the outside world is tiny, even if it's a highly energetic proton.
Is it able to collide anything larger?
The Large Hadron Collider is not directly set up to do that, but there are other machines. For instance, there's a machine called the Relativistic Heavy Ion Collider, which is not far from here in New York. And those machines slam together heavier nuclei, where it's not just a single proton, it's groups of protons. So yes, we can do that. And you design the machine based on what it is that you want to study. If you want to study fundamental physics, you want the simplest probe. If you have a complex probe, there's a lot of murky physics that comes, if you slam, two BMWs together, it's a total mess. How would you ever figure out the details of what happened? But you slam two clean protons together, much easier to measure, much easier to determine what happened.
Right. Another area of physics that is interesting to me is entropy. And does everything in the universe have to have balance? Is there a universal law of equal and opposite forces?
No, there isn't. In many situations, you will find that. So, for instance, if you look at a planet like the Earth, it's got a whole lot of positive charges, a lot of protons making up the Earth, but there's basically the same number of negative charges, electrons. So they all kind of balance out, and in aggregate, the Earth is roughly speaking neutral in terms of its charge. And that's with us human bodies as well. You don't have to have that, though. You could have imagined a world where there are only positive charges or only negative charges. Now, things wouldn't stick together, so it'd be hard to have aggregates because like charges repel each other. That's why it's nice to have balance, because they can sort of come together. But I wouldn't say that there's some overarching meta law of reality that says that there has to be some balance. But in our world, especially when getting to entropy, the word that you mentioned, when it comes to thermal equilibrium, we call it, when things have enough time to relax to their most comfortable state, balance will typically happen. Electrons and their antiparticle positrons, they've got the same mass, and mass determines the amount of energy needed to create those particles. And so if it's the same mass, it's the same energy necessary, on average, you'll expect to have as many positrons as electrons because of that. So in practice, there's a lot of balance in the world, but nothing absolutely demands it. And I'll give you one key example. Our world does not have a balance between matter and antimatter. There's certain examples where you will find them, certain systems, like I mentioned with electrons and positrons, but take the universe as a whole. If there was a balance of matter and antimatter, well, an antimatter and matter come together, they annihilate. There'd be nothing left. We wouldn't be here. And so there had to be a little bit of an imbalance in the amount of matter versus antimatter in the universe, and not big. You needed one more particle of matter in every billion particles of matter and antimatter together. It's just you needed 1,000,000,001 of the matter against 1,000,000,000 of the antimatter. They annihilate, leaving 1 per billion, and that's enough to make you and me and everything else.
Right. We just need now some time or whatever that is.
Yes, you needed some imbalance. So imbalance is important in certain circumstances. Without it, we wouldn't be here.
Right. Well, I think about, okay, let me ask. The universe is expanding, correct? And it's expanding faster and faster.
Yes.
But entropy is another fundamental truth in the universe, correct? Like,
yes.
Everything is essentially leading towards entropy, but yet the universe is growing at an exponential rate. So how do you rectify that? Or do those even go together as a thought of how does that happen?
They do. It's a very intricate dance between the entropy of the cosmos and the size and the expansion of the cosmos. At some level, you can imagine that there is nice resonance, because if you think about entropy as disorder, you say to yourself, well, if a system is bigger, it has greater capacity to be disordered, right? I mean, if you have a 1-bedroom apartment, there's just so much disorder there can be. But now if you've got 10 bedrooms, you could have disorder in all of them. You could have more disorder because you've got more space. And so you might say the expanding universe is compatible with an increase in entropy because now there's more space to house the increasing disorder. And there's some truth to it, of that way of thinking. It's not the full story, but certainly part of the story. But the interesting thing with the accelerated expansion is that, in a way that would be a little hard for me to explain fully, but I'll just give the basic idea. Because the universe is expanding at faster than the speed of light, that's a crazy idea, but it is. It means that there are places out there beyond which we can't see. Because once the expansion goes faster than the speed of light, the light can't reach us.
Right.
So in a sense, we are surrounded by a sphere that we can't see beyond. And that sphere, in some sense, has entropy. And that entropy in that sphere is generating some heat within our universe. So when you think about the far future of the universe and what its entropy will be like, that's the situation that you wind up analyzing. Imagining that we are surrounded by a large sphere that's coming from the accelerated expansion, and that sphere itself has a temperature, and that temperature controls the final entropy of the cosmos. Wow. It's a complex set of ideas, but that's how it works.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I don't completely understand that, but
I wouldn't expect, as I said, there's a lot behind every step in there. But yes, there is a deep relationship between the expansion of the universe, the temperature of the universe, the disorder or the entropy of the universe. They all play off each other.
One of the thoughts I had growing up as a kid, the idea that it goes on for infinity, because I would look up at the stars and I would be like, wow. And then at the end, it doesn't end, it's infinity. Is that true? And can we even know that based on what you just said about not being able to see beyond the speed of light? So does it end?
We don't know. And my guess is, if you were to interview sample a whole variety of physicists and astronomers and astrophysicists, I think the dominant answer you would get is that yes, it goes on infinitely far. But we don't know that. And it need not go on infinitely far. For instance, the universe could have a shape that is more like the surface of the Earth, right? On the surface of the Earth, you walk in one direction. If you never change direction, you will return to your starting point. The surface does not go on infinitely far. It could be the case in the cosmos that you go out into space, don't change your direction, you come back ultimately to your starting point. That's a possibility too.
Sure. And then the expansion is just essentially the planet growing.
That's right. It's making that surface or that shape get larger. You're absolutely right. Okay. And so we don't know. And it does matter. I mean, there are certain key ideas about the universe that depend on this idea. For instance, if the universe is not infinite, then the picture that we often paint when we talk about the Big Bang, we say in the past, the universe was smaller and smaller and smaller. And we say at the very beginning, it was like a little dot that then erupted in this rapid swelling called the Big Bang. But you see, the idea of there being a dot universe is completely dependent on the shape of the universe, the size being finite. Because if it's infinite, let's say it really does go on forever, like your younger self imagined when you were out there looking in the stars, it goes on infinitely far. Let's say you go back in time so the universe is half its current size. Well, what's half of infinity? Infinity.
Exactly.
What's a third of infinity? So it's always infinite. Even at the Big Bang, it's infinite. So this idea of a little dot from which we all came, that's a misnomer. If the universe is infinite, then it was infinite even at time zero. And the whole thing erupted and started to expand from the infinitely dense state of the infinite expanse at the beginning of time itself. So it really changed our picture.
Yeah, because of course, when you say it's expanding, you're implying that there's an end.
Not necessarily.
That's why you have to change the shape.
So imagine it is the infinite case. By expansion, it's not that we are encroaching on new space that wasn't already included. It's simply that the distances between points in the existing space are growing larger. So imagine you have like an infinitely big piece of rubber. It can still stretch, even if it's not encompassing new space.
I see. It's spreading out.
Spreading out. Exactly.
So, right. And we probably don't have the technology to know if we're discovering new galaxies and universes, or galaxies, and we're not necessarily, but they're being born, right? But they're also dying.
Being born. But look, all we can ever do is gather light through powerful telescopes, right? We have the James Webb Space Telescope. Maybe you heard of it. It's out there right now, a million miles from Earth, making these stunning pictures. But what is it? It's a big mirror that gathers light. So all we can ever do is gather radiation, gather light in various wavelengths, or gather gravity in various wavelengths and so forth. That we'll be beginning to do in the future. We can't see things that are beyond a certain distance. They're just too far away for the light to have ever reached us, and the light may never reach us. And therefore, if there's an end out there, it may be beyond what we can see. If it goes on infinitely far, that's certainly beyond what we will ever be able to see. So this may be a permanently unanswered question.
What do you think it would mean to actually figure out the theory of everything, to be able to relate the small to the big for everything in the universe? What would that mean for us?
Well, for people like me, it would mean that
retirement.
Yeah, that's a whole nother question. But for me, it would mean that the human mind had risen to the challenge of grasping the fundamental laws of the cosmos. So that's not a very practical answer, but it is one that I think would fill me and my colleagues with a sense of how amazing is it that we were constructed in just the right way to be able to grasp the fundamental truth, the fundamental laws. And that would be thrilling and wondrous. But from a practical standpoint, what would it mean? It's hard to say. I will say this, though. If you and I were to have this conversation in the 1920s, 100 years ago, at that time, the big thing was quantum physics. And if you said to me, hey, you guys are developing this quantum physics about atoms and molecules, like if it's right, what will that mean? At that point, I probably would have said something similar. It won't mean much. It'll mean that we can understand blah, 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 similar to what I said a moment ago. But now you fast forward till today, and the fact that you and I are having this conversation is relying on quantum physics, because the integrated circuit, which is in all of our computers and all of our devices, would not exist without quantum physics. Quantum physics allowed us to guide the motion of little particles, these little electrons, to these miniature circuits, allowing us to have the whole electronics industry emerge and explode, which is all just to say that it's often hard to predict where fundamental discovery will lead. In the 1920s, nobody could have imagined the iPhone or the personal computer, but their work led to it. If we figure out the final, ultimate, unified theory, who knows where it will go?
Do you think that us as human beings and our programming, or whatever it is that makes us up, is really even capable of being able to make these kinds of discoveries? Do you think that it's perhaps inherent to our nature that we aren't going to get all the answers?
I don't know. And if it is the case, I wouldn't say it's because there's some divine decree where some super intelligence, some divine plan said, let's let the humans go this far and no further, or something like that. Again, I just think that we emerge through the blind forces of evolution by natural selection. We have this capacity to find patterns, as we started our conversation in our discussion. And in those patterns, we've been able to gain insight into how things work. Now, is this thing sufficiently developed to be able to answer every question that we encounter? Some might say, well, the questions are coming from in here, so maybe this thing is well suited to the very questions that it's able to come up with. Or the questions you say are, well, they're more fundamental. No, they're coming from out there. And why should this inner structure have the capacity to answer every question that the external world can conjure? And I think the real answer is we'll keep going, we'll push forward. Maybe one day we'll hit a wall and we'll be unable to answer anything else. We'll go to the beach, we'll enjoy ourselves, daiquiri, whatever, but maybe we will continue to make progress. And as long as we can, we will push forward.
One of the experiences with psilocybin was that it felt like I went to a baseline reality, which was a waveform. And in that space, I immediately went, how am I ever going to be human? I know it's not real. So it makes me wonder, what is it that creates our reality then?
Yeah. I mean, I think we create our own reality, and don't take the wrong way. I do think there are real things in the world. I mean, there is this real cup, there's real stuff, but the way we organize that stuff and the way we assign meaning to that stuff and value to that stuff is all something that we invent inside of our heads.
Right.
And so that's the way in which we create narratives and stories in order to be able to understand our world and to feel good about our world, to get us up in the morning and to try to do things. We tell ourselves story that's important to do that. But there is no cosmic importance. There's no fundamental importance. The universe doesn't give a hoot whether we do X, Y, or Z.
We really just need to be having a lot more fun then.
Well, it's all invented. It's all invented. So we invent the things that we consider to be important, and then we pursue them as best as we can. And that is a fruitful way of being in the world. But there are other ways of being in the world. And who knows, maybe we will find a different way of organizing and navigating, maybe through psychedelics, maybe through something completely different, AR, VR, maybe we'll be in the metaverse. I don't know. But the point is, it is all invented in the sense of, without invention, all you've got are particles governed by forces floating through the void. That's it.
Was there not something that just happened where, I'm going to probably get the words wrong, proving like non-locality for things like a table, that unless it's observed, it's not there?
I wouldn't agree with the very last part of your description, but certainly with the entanglement ideas, you may be referring to the fact that this year's Nobel Prize went to three physicists, John Clauser, Anton Zeilinger, and Alain Aspect, for work that they pioneered over decades, establishing that quantum physics does have this so-called non-local property, which is you can have a particle here and a particle there. They can really be arbitrarily far apart. But if you set things up in the right way, when you do something to this particle, it instantaneously affects, or at least is correlated with, the behavior of this particle as if they were right next to each other, and yet they're not.
Is that also quantum entanglement as well?
That is quantum entanglement, yeah. And this is an idea that Einstein was one of the early investigators of.
Spooky things happening at a distance?
Yes, exactly. And that language really showed clearly that Einstein did not like this idea, did not think it could possibly be true. And in fact, in the 1935 paper that Einstein wrote with his colleagues Podolsky and Rosen, his point was, hello, quantum physicists, look at what your theory's predicting, distant objects behaving as they are one. I'm going to shake you out of your quantum stupor, you quantum physicists. That was his perspective. He didn't think it was real. And now we know it's real because the experiments have established this quality. And now not only are Nobel Prizes being awarded for it, but it's the basis of what's known as the quantum computer, which is a computer that makes use of these strange connections to do calculations much more quickly than it otherwise would be able.
Do you think it's possible that as we continue to learn and grow and evolve and collect more information, that essentially we create new math over and over again to be able to establish an understanding?
Totally. I mean, the work that I was fortunate to be involved with some years ago in a part of string theory that yielded insights into mathematics required that we develop new mathematics to understand what it was that we were describing. So I had a wonderfully productive few months, years and years ago, at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, which is where Einstein was for the last couple decades of his life. But I was there much later, obviously, and I worked with a mathematician, a guy named David Morrison. He's at University of California, Santa Barbara now. And we would spend hours and hours a day where I would teach him physics, he would teach me mathematics, because we knew that what we were working on required us each to know the language of the other really well, so that we could blend it together and create quantum mathematics in order to fully understand what it is that we were working on, for sure. And many others. I don't mean to make it sound like I'm the only one who's done this. There are many in the field who have revolutionized mathematics from the physical understanding of a certain system.
Is quantum mathematics, quantum physics, and put into math, is that done? Is that all understood, or is that still unfinished to a large degree?
Very much unfinished. And I think we really only caught the glimpse of what it's all about. And whether it's a year or a decade or a century away from completion, I don't know, but it's a very exciting time. Because again, many of my colleagues are pushing the frontier more than I am at the moment, but there's such deep insight into the nature of space and time and quantum mechanics and black holes. It's all going to reinvent our understanding of the physics, and we will require a mathematical language to accurately encapsulate all of that, which is very much a work in progress.
What discovery could be made that would change our reality the most?
Well, I think if we truly understood how the universe began, all we have is a description of how it evolved. We don't really know how it got started. I think that's the real big one. And connected with that is the issue of what truly is time. You asked before, is it another dimension? I nodded my head and sort of explained the way in which it gives us the fourth piece of data so that you know where and when an event took place. But if you ask me, okay, fine, but what is time? What really is it? I would mumble things like, well, it's what allows for change to occur, or, it's what allows everything to not happen all at once, or something like that. But the truth is, nobody really knows what time is. And I think having a deep understanding of that abstract idea is a very important and potent question going forward.
Thank you so much. Yeah. See, we're right on time. Whatever this time thing is, we are right on time.
Excellent. Well, anyway, it was great talking to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.